2 GT-40. So I sent those to South Africa, and he used those, and thank God that all worked out, because he supplied me with a roller, which I really just wanted a chassis, but they just said, no, you got to take it as a roller. So then I took their roller, and I took off a lot of their parts and put my original parts on that I had collected over a period of like 10 to 12 years, which was a major undertaking. And then I was able to buy original parts that I had and put on there, and that's how this car came about, but it took time.
Yeah, I mean, this car, for anybody who doesn't know or ever seen a real Mark II, obviously they're very, very rare. This is as close as you can get. It's basically a real Mark II without being a real Mark II. But why we brought it up on stage, it's so authentic that when Ford versus Ferrari was coming together, they decided they want to use the sound because of the engine, transmission, and all the other parts. They wanted authentic sounds on shifting. How many microphones, when you use it for the show, you did taping it 2 days roughly, correct?
Yes. 20th Century Fox came in, and we spent 8 hours wiring the car with 16 microphones.
16 microphones. Now, could you just walk around the car where all the microphones were?
Well, there was one right here between me and the guy that was doing the taping over there.
Right.
They had one next to the shifter, and they had a whole bunch in the engine bay.
Even at the shift point where the transmission was, correct?
Near the exhaust pipes.
Brake pedal?
Yeah, and the transmission on the so there was everywhere. There was,
yeah, they were very detailed in this movie, and they really got the effects down pretty good. And I mean, this is just an absolutely beautiful piece. While we give the microphone to Lee, could we open up the bonnet in the back, Ted? Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Holman from Holman Moody, who was there in 1966. We have a round of applause, please. We have to enjoy these days every single day, okay? Lee, tell us, you were there in 66. You appreciate this car for what it is. The snake pipes and everything out the back. Also tell us who were your drivers at the time. And all these cars were right-hand drive at the time, correct?
Yes.
Go ahead, a little closer.
The Mark II GT-40 was meant to go steamroll Ferrari. It was just supposed to blow them away. The Ferrari of today could only run about 190, and by using the 427 Ford engine, detuned from what we raced in NASCAR. We were turning an 85 in NASCAR, but the engine would last about 500 miles, hopefully. For this purpose, we took the engine and made it 10.5 to 1 compression, not 13. We put a high torque marine cam in it and planned to turn the cars no more than 6,400. But because of the camshaft having so much torque at a low RPM, the car could carry a really tall gear, like a 238 or something per in ratio. So that at 6,400, this car is doing 220. And a 427 center oiler or a side oiler at 6,400 will last forever. There's no problem at all.
Right, now, to everybody in this room, it sounds common today with modern Formula One. This is 55 years ago, and there's no computer assistance, there's no fuel injection, there's no four-wheel drive, there's no electronic braking.
And no computer.
And no computers. So when you watch the technology, we were talking about this before the show, okay? When you take from 1900, like Leno used to say, when cars first came out to 1966, every 10 years was like a 100-year jump, okay? The technology went through the roof. But if we take this car in 1966, air dams and bringing the forest down and all that stuff, it really hasn't changed. This was the pinnacle. Nothing really changed from 70 till now, other than the computers and the efficiency and technology.
And the cars have remained so popular because of it doesn't kill the driver. The driver's comfortable. It goes when you point it. You can steer it with the steering wheel. You can steer it with the rear end, with the acceleration. And because it has no computers, no turbochargers, no wings, the car was safe to
like
drive.
the
When
V8.
I had mine, if you were smart to get, if the car got sideways, if you're smart enough to let go of the steering wheel, the car would save itself most of the time. And unlike the later cars, the GT-40 IMSAs and those sort of cars with big wings and big turbochargers and all the computers, if you got one of the wing cars sideways, you couldn't save it, it was gone. But these cars, the driver said it was the last car that was fun to drive. After that, the drivers were just riding, waiting for the computer to kick in or the turbos to kick in or whatever. But we had fabulous drivers: Mark Donahue, Walt Hanskin, Dick Hutchison,
Mario Andretti.
Mario Andretti, Lucien Picard, a famous French driver, or Swiss driver. We had the best of the best. Shelby had his group of drivers, and we were there because Ford had ownership of the Shelby American Company. They had taken him over. Holman and Moody was always independent, so our drivers were paid first place money, no matter where they finished, as long as they wouldn't pass a Shelby team car on the track unless a Ferrari passed a Shelby team car. So we were under team orders, which is why we finished third. But so being at the track, with these cars going past you, we'd be in the pits, and the pit lane would have been really about as far as from that this wall. Where you're standing was the racetrack. And in '66, there was no barrier.
And no speed limit coming into the pits as well.
Yeah.
No speed limit.
Well, they'd slow them down and there'd be a horn going, ba-da, ba-da, ba-da.
Right.
That meant a car was on pit road. But you would literally be here changing the tire, and there, where the tire tracks are, the cars are going 280 or 180.
180.
180 miles an hour going past you. But don't be afraid, because there was a white line that they weren't allowed to cross. that was what kept us safe. But
Don't worry.
at 65, I was there, and I had helped out a man run the Cobra Coops. And I ended up being the fueler. And the only safety precaution involved in being a fueler at Le Mans for 24 hours was the fact that I didn't smoke. Everyone else on the team did smoke.
Unbelievable. You know, talking about that, you had dual tanks in the car. If you guys are interested, you can take a look around. Just give us a couple of feet. The tanks were obviously put in the middle, you know, on the rails, okay, for the space. But did it also balance the car and bring it down?
It did, but the dangerous part was
when you started losing it?
No, the dangerous part was
got hit?
between this fuel cell and that fuel cell, there was an aluminum tube between the two tanks that's under the driver's legs. And so in an accident, this car could fill up with fuel. And the drivers, being aware of that, practiced getting the heck out.
So there was a left-right switch?
No. When they raced these cars, they had 3 fuel pumps. They had 2 pumps that were running all the time, one on each tank. And then they had
Like an intermediate?
a collection reservoir,
Right.
and another pump there running to the carburetor.
Okay, but did it get kooky, like if one side was less gas than the other, did you have to offset that?
The connector pipe leveled it out.
Oh, all the time, I understand.
You would fill it in, we would have the filler on this side or that side for Le Mans or Daytona, depending upon which way the cars were going around the track.
And is that why there's a filler on both sides?
Well, on some of the races, they could fill it from both sides. At Le Mans, you had to do it just from one side. In Daytona, you did it from one side.
Okay. What we were talking about yesterday, guys, if you, the steering wheels were on the right side, but also the shift was on the right side. I always thought it was because Mario Andretti couldn't shift left. Go ahead.
That was a typical arrangement, because if you think about it, the shift is a tube that is pivoted by the shift handle. It rocks a little bit, and the shift tube would have difficulty going back past the engine. So the right-hand shift was to go around and get back to the transaxle. The Carcraft T-44 transaxle has a single shaft with a finger on it, and that little change in angle of the shifter would decide whether it was in first and second or third and fourth were reversed.
Right.
But they were wonderful cars, and they're still competitive. They're still very, very fast.
Now, you still make recreations or continuations at your shop today?
No,
Not at all?
no. We make new, original, real Mark
There you
II.
go. There you go. I want to be careful.
We've got 7 more chassis of the tinted panel variety. The real issue was that the panels had a fire, and some of the presses that they had used different tooling than what tinted panels can use.
Right.
And so there's a slight difference in the panels, mostly in the shape of the ribs on top of the fuel tanks. That's
Right.
one of the biggest changes from an Abbey to a tinted panels chassis. But the car itself was so basic, it's like a truck. It just goes 220.
It's unbelievable.
And it would get 7 miles an hour of fuel economy because of the aerodynamics and the fact that the engine wasn't turning so tight. So that the fuel efficiency was really quite good on these cars.
Now, when we went from a GT-40, like a series, a Mark I, okay? Look at the differences when you decided to change the scoops and the airflow and going over the top. Is that also because when you went from the small block to the big block and you had the scoops on the back of the...
Well, the difference was with the small block, the engine had to scream its little guts out, turn about 8,500 RPM, and it still didn't move the car quite fast enough to just steamroller forward. The early car had a defective aerodynamics that caused the front end to lift.
Come on.
But by 65, they had the front end dynamics sorted out, and Mark I were similar to this. They were a little bit lower on the bump here. Typically, the Mark I has a splitter behind the radiator.
Right.
But the big difference was a 5-speed with a 289 engine can't keep up with a 4-speed and 427.
Right.
You just have grunt, cubic inch grunt.
What was the horsepower on average were you using for like Le Mans? Like you didn't want to blow it out at 900 horsepower.
No.
You'd blow it up.
We barely had 500 normally.
Wow. Yeah.
And the drivers were only that much horsepower. But when you put it in here, and on my car, my first Mark II that I built, you would go first, second, third on pit road at Charlotte. You'd still be on pit road when you went into third, but you're running 130 miles an hour. Still on pit road.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman that said he wanted to buy one, and he annoyed me when he got in my car and he said, "Don't try to scare me because I've got a 427 Cobra." And I thought, you twit. They don't go anywhere. The rear wheels spin, they make smoke. This car, the rear wheels never spin. It's linear acceleration, first, second, third, you're at 130, and you still got another gear to go. And he, riding with me, turned as blue as your shirt, and started hyperventilating, and I got the car stopped because I could see he was having trouble breathing. And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "That was grunt horsepower." And he said, "It's too fast for me, let me out." And so he made one test ride from here, maybe halfway down to the main strip down there. But the car is so impressive when you get it on the track at Daytona. It's meant to be there. It handles the speed. The aerodynamics are nice. And so you can fall asleep in it at 175.
Now, we talked years ago, we've been friends for a very long time. Of all the setups, would you agree Ken Miles probably had the best setup?
Absolutely not. He had the worst.
No. Okay, good.
He liked his car to get the back end out.
Really?
The best, I think, was Mark Donahue.
Really?
And I don't like Mark, but just like this car, the cars we build are exactly the way they were, so the corner weights are all the same. The spring settings, the shock settings, the sway bar settings are all the same. And I could take my car and set it up the way Dane Gurney wanted his, or the way Ken Miles wanted his, and you could feel the difference.
It's just incredible. 55 years later, it's just, and you can still do it. It's just unbelievable.
Now there was one thing in the race movie that was funny. they had the cars trying to finish equal. And in fact, Ken Miles was the favorite driver for the Shelby team. He was the factory driver. Everybody wanted him to do well. Bruce McLaren was faster in the Shelby team car. So the McLaren car were changing the shocks, changing the springs to slow Bruce down so that he could win. And Bruce figured out what was happening at the final test day on Friday and had our mechanics and Alan Mann mechanics stay over that night and change all his suspension settings back to the original settings for the cars. And that's why when Ford, okay guys, let's be friendly and have a photo finish, Bruce McLaren set up yours. And he went on to win.
Yeah, that's good. We have 10 minutes left before the next group comes in. I don't want to rush it. Tell me your most favorite parts about the Mark II GT-40.
Well, the best is the sound.
We're going to hear again in a minute.
The sound is so good. I've had people come up to me at vintage races with tears in their eyes. I'm just so thankful you brought your car and we race it and let my son hear what a 427 at full song sounds like. It's just the best sound in the world. It was funny at Le Mans. Each lap was 5 minutes or something. And you could tell in a second if your car was late. You got the cadence of the deal and you'd go get a Coke or something, but if your car was half a second late coming by, you would recognize the sound was missing. And so you really get into a 24-hour boom sort of passing. And in the meantime, all the Ford engineers are going, I hope they finish, because Henry Ford was going to chop their heads off if they didn't.
Last but not least, we were talking a while back at Amelia Island with David Hobbs, the GT-40 reunion. Nobody could fathom what these cars would be worth today. But again, we were telling the story yesterday, if you were here, that the drivers were offered after the 69 season, 70, the rules changed, they went to different cars, safety features and all that stuff. So this car, the last years of these cars was 1969 for the most part, until we got the vintage racing. And it was John Wyer, correct?
Yeah.
They went to David Hobbs. John Wyer was the team owner of it. And he goes, listen mate, we gotta get rid of these cars. We'll let you have your cars back. You could buy them for $5,300. And David Hobbs goes, you want to buy that old piece of junk that almost got killed in for you?
Yeah.
And none of them bought it. I think maybe one guy bought it. I don't think it was Hicks. I don't think it was Jackie Hicks, but one of them bought it.
My dad offered Humpty Wheeler, the manager at Charlemont Speedway, his choice of a bass boat that we had sitting in the warehouse or one of the GT-40s, and he took the bass boat.
Took the bass boat.
But my dad had 9 of them. He decided in his 300,000 square foot warehouse that these cars were in his way. So he decided to sell them, and he started marketing them at $10,000 a piece with spares. I tried to buy them, he wouldn't sell them to me. And the bank wouldn't loan me the money unless he co-signed, he wouldn't do that. And so I got angry enough that I left the company over it. But now, of the 9 that he had, the worst one with the worst reputation is for sale for $10.5 million.
$10.5
The best
million.
one is about $18 million of our cars. And we could reproduce the same thing for $1 million today, and it's absolutely the same. And the other thing that's odd, when Ford raced these, they didn't say Ford on the serial number plate because Ford was afraid of product liability. So all the cars had Holman and Moody serial numbers. So it means when we make a new one, it's a new, old, original car, according to the FIA. So it's a little bit unusual.
Thank you, Lee. Before we move back to Ted, hold on. Does anybody have a question for Lee? They can scream it out. Talking to Lee Holman from Holman Moody. Anybody have a question? Did they use any true GT-40s in the movie? I don't think they did. I think all of them were super performance or copied cars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My knowledge, there was no original cars in the
Yeah.
I think that for some of the ads for the movie, they used the original Ken Miles car, which belongs to Miller in Utah.
Yep.
But
Other than that, I think that was it. Now, Lee, we're going to turn the microphone back over to Ted because of his dedication to create this. Can we have a round of applause for Lee Holman, please? Now, when we're all done at 3:30, Lee's in his tent. If somebody wants something to autograph, most of you know I've got inside Building T, a 2005 white Ford GT. Anybody makes a donation to general needs, $5, $10, $20, to feed 800 homeless veterans we feed a month. You can sit in the 05 GT and take all the pictures you want. We'll be here at 5 o'clock, okay? Not bad. Ted, we got the microphone? How long did this take you, my friend? It was a long time to build this
It was
car.
about 15 years from beginning to end. Because I started collecting parts about 15 years ago. And first part I bought was a carburetor.
Yep.
You build a car around a carburetor. But it's you know, the rear vent is off of Mario Andretti's car that ran Le Mans in '66.
I mean, guys, now you can come up close. Take pictures.
This is a rear clip off an original car. The headers were off original jigs. It's got the correct T-44 transmission that they use in the Mark IIs. Those suitcase boxes that they required by FAI standards. Those come off of Team Le Mans cars. That's so. Yeah, the taillights are a 1961 Corvair taillights. And so I found NOS Corvair taillights. You know, the dash, I gutted the car because it wasn't what I wanted. You know, the dash that came to the car was nice, but it wasn't accurate. So I got a correct 66 spec dash and did the inside. Put a roll cage in it, which you can barely see. The whole front end's been modified. If you buy a cookie cutter car, you don't get these with them.
Right.
And this,
Also explain the hooks in the front. Obviously, that was for quick
Yeah.
up and down for quick changes.
right, they have a big cart that they would put underneath there as a fulcrum, and they would jack up the front of the car to change the tires.
Right, so a guy would jump up on the bar and the whole front nose would come off and you whack off both wheels at the same time. Lee would know. Pit changes, tire changes, fuel. What was the average in '66?
You couldn't do a quick pit stop because there was always a little Frenchman there that had to put a seal on the fuel filter cap. You had to put a seal, and in the '67 race, they made the spare, you had to take the spare tire out of the car, touch it on the ground, and then put it back in. All of these rules were put in place to try and keep Ford from beating Ferrari. The French were not that keen on the project. But usually you'd have a pit stop and you'd get done with the fueling and the drivers had to get out for fueling. But as you're getting ready to go, you'd have to try and get this Frenchman to put his little cognac down and come over and put the seal on the fuel cap and seal on the radiator and off you go. So the pit stops are not like we did at Daytona. We were trying to give a 30-second pit stop on it.
But on average, what was the average pit stop? On average?
Half.
Okay, so it's about a minute and a half for 4 tires and fuels for the most part. We've got 5 minutes left before we wrap up. Ted, I want him to tell the story about the end of Ford versus Ferrari, which was they took a little liberty on changing brake pads, which he'll explain. Do you want to bring up anything else? Does anybody else have a question for Ted? Where he got the stuff from, how he built it? If anybody has questions, this is going to be back in Building T in about 15 minutes, okay? Now, tell us about the liberties the movie producers took at the end of the movie when they were changing the brakes and took out the whole front end of the car in 36 seconds flat. Go ahead.
There's a scene when the character playing Carroll Shelby says, "We're going to get our pit stops as quick as those NASCAR guys," referring to us. And on the movie, they have him roll a cart out in a pit road that has a full front suspension. A-frames, shock, brakes, upright, everything, the complete one-side front end, which takes about 3 hours to move that out.
Did you guys remember that in the movie?
And
when they pulled the whole front end down? Okay.
the character says that's how we're going to speed up the pit stops. Well, in 3 hours, they would have fixed one brake or repaired one corner. The real change was just moving the brake cap from the inside flange to the outside flange of the rear hub, so that when you took the wheel off and the caliper were off, the rotor and hat would fall off in your lap. And that's what made the pit stop so quick. The GT-40 Mark I would take 15-20 minutes in a pit stop changing brake rotors. And the Mark II, we could do it in probably a minute or less, you know. It's funny.
Yeah, it's just another funny side note. Now, Ted, I'm going to take that microphone. Do you want to add it? We're going to be bringing this back into Building T. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, this gentleman right here wanted to know what happened to the number 3 car, which, I'm glad you asked that, because I actually duplicated Dan Gurney's number 3 car. I went to great lengths to do that, and that was 1047. But there was a discrepancy after they come back from Le Mans. 1047 ended up doing some more racing, and there was a number change on the toe.
What actually happened in France, we had to enter the car by serial number. And 1047 by serial number had been entered into the race at Reims, France. And it was wrecked at Le Mans. And because of that wreck, 1047 couldn't be raced. So they took the tag off of 1042, I believe, and put it on the wreck, and took 1047 and put it on the other car, which is now in the Collier Museum down in Naples, Florida. But that was the last GT-40, the Mark II, that actually raced. The reason they didn't race anymore, the Ford was so efficient in '67 that it won not only the Little Cup, which was for a 24-hour race, but the Big Cup that won the index of performance. Typically a French car would win that, the car that got the most miles on the least fuel. But in '67, the Ferraris fell out and the Fords were able to back off and run at a comfortable speed. They got enough fuel that the car won the Little Cup and the Little Money, but it won the French trophy for the index of performance. And so the French countered with what the French usually do. They outlawed the cars. They weren't allowed to bring them back. So that's why they went for the small block version, and we parts over to JW Automotive. So they basically, their small block Mark 1s in '67 or '68 and '69 were Mark 2s with a little engine, basically.
Before we wrap it up, can we have a round of applause for Lee? And can we have a round of applause for Ted? Thank you. We have 1 minute till this beautiful truck comes up next. Guys, you're going to hear a nice show right now, but he's got to make a U-turn here because of the cement dividers. Can we all just go back to the fence? And then he'll start. He's got to make a U-turn. Get your video cameras ready. Wait, you're on the wrong side. Where are you going? So cute. I like when these young guys jumping in and out of these cars. You guys ready? Please, guys, you got to move back. He's got to make a U-turn in here to get out. He's going to have to Lee, thank you once again, my friend. Love you.